I'm Sarah Holt, I'm 38, and I worked my way up from a junior intel officer to a Navy captain. For years, I bent over backwards to support my father, rides, appointments, paperwork, everything, always trying to keep the peace. But the day he grabbed my arm in a Pentagon hallway and yelled that I didn't belong in a room I was cleared to lead, I made a different choice. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or humiliated by someone you showed up for, you'll understand this. And you're not alone. Share your story in the comments. Before I get into what happened, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after being pushed too far, hit like and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, power, and taking your life back. What happened next surprised even me. I arrived at the Pentagon on a Tuesday morning in late October, my service khakis pressed sharp enough to cut glass. The assignment was routine, a week-long joint tasking rotation with intelligence teams from all branches. I'd done this before. The building didn't intimidate me anymore. My father insisted on driving me from his place in Arlington. "Traffic around here is insane," he said, already reaching for his keys before I could protest. "I'll get you where you need to be." James Holt had worked at the Pentagon for 32 years as a GS-15 program manager before retiring. He knew every corridor, every cafeteria, every shortcut through the labyrinth. He also talked about it constantly, as if the building belonged to him in some fundamental way. We merged onto Interstate 395 in his aging Camry, the radio tuned to a talk station I didn't recognize. He drove with the confidence of someone who'd made this commute 10,000 times. "So, what rank are you now?" he asked, eyes on the road. "Lieutenant? Maybe Lieutenant Commander." "Commander," I said. "Oh, 5. Has been for 3 years, Dad." He nodded vaguely, the information sliding past him like water off glass. Right. That's good." Moving up the ladder. I didn't correct him further. This was a familiar pattern. My father measured my career in abstractions. Promotions were good, assignments were interesting, deployments were necessary, but he never asked what I actually did. Intelligence analysis, operational planning, classified briefings that shaped fleet movements across the Pacific. These details never landed. In his mind, I was still the ensign who'd called him nervously before her first underway period. At the Pentagon gate, he pulled up with the casual ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He reached for his old DoD badge, the one with his photo from 2015, back when his hair was darker and his jawline sharper. The guard glanced at it, then at him. "Sir, this credential expired 6 years ago." My father's face tightened. "I worked here for 3 decades. "I think I know, Dad." I leaned forward from the passenger seat, offering my active duty ID and orders. "He's just dropping me off." The guard processed my credentials, waved us through, and my father drove in silence for 30 seconds before muttering, "Used to be you could just show your face." We parked in Visitor Lot C. He insisted on walking me inside, even though I had my bearings and a schedule to keep. He moved through the corridors like a tour guide, pointing out offices he used to frequent, breaking rooms that used to serve better coffee, hallways that used to be restricted but weren't anymore. "She works in the Navy," he told a passing Army major who'd nodded politely at me. "Not, she's a commander. Not, she's here for joint operations. Just, she works in the Navy, like I filed paperwork in a back office somewhere." As we walked, he corrected my posture. "Shoulders back, Sarah. You're representing the service." I was already standing straight. I'd been standing straight since I learned to march at the academy. But I didn't argue. Arguing with my father about small things only made the small things bigger. Near the secure corridor leading to the SCF wings, he slowed his pace and lowered his voice. "Listen, these rooms down here? They're for top brass. Generals, admirals, the people running actual operations. Don't embarrass yourself trying to sit in on meetings you're not cleared for." I kept walking. I didn't tell him I'd been cleared for TS/SCI since I was a lieutenant. I didn't tell him I'd briefed flag officers on threat assessments in 3 different theaters. I didn't tell him that top brass had requested me specifically for this rotation. The old patterns were too entrenched. He saw me as someone who needed guidance, protection, warnings about a world he thought he understood better than I did. And I'd never pushed back hard enough to break the cycle. It was easier to let him believe what he needed to believe. But something felt different today. Maybe it was the way he kept talking over me. Maybe it was the way he explained Pentagon etiquette to me like I was a tourist. Maybe it was just the accumulation of years, decades, really, of being unseen. We reached the main atrium. He checked his watch, a old Timex with a scratched face. "I'll pick you up at 1700 hours," he said. "Don't wander off. This place is a maze if you don't know it." "I'll be fine, Dad. I'm serious. People get lost here all the time." I didn't tell him I'd navigated carrier flight decks in the dark, coordinated with allied forces in languages I barely spoke, managed crisis responses in windowless rooms under impossible pressure. I just nodded. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more commanding than affectionate, and turned to leave. I watched him go, his gait still confident, still assured, still moving through the Pentagon like he owned a piece of it. I checked my phone. 1400 hours. I had 30 minutes before my first briefing. I stopped by the restroom, checked my uniform in the mirror, adjusted my cover. The woman looking back at me was a commander in the United States Navy. She had 17 years of service, 3 combat deployments, and a record clean enough to earn her a spot in rooms most people would never see. But to my father, she was still someone who needed directions to the parking lot. I left the restroom and headed toward the secure wing. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. SCIF 4B. Interagency Threat Assessment. Attendees. Joint Chiefs Staff, SecDef Reps, Branch Operational Leads. I moved faster, heels clicking against the polished floor. My father's voice echoed in my head. "Don't embarrass yourself." I passed officers of every rank, civilians with badges marking them as senior analysts, contractors with lanyards color-coded by clearance level. No one looked at me twice. I belonged here. But a part of me, a part one didn't like acknowledging, still felt like I was sneaking into a room I wasn't supposed to enter. That feeling had my father's voice attached to it. It always had. I turned down the corridor toward the SCF entrance, the walls narrowing, the lighting dimmer. Security cameras tracked movement from ceiling corners. A Marine stood outside the reinforced door, checking credentials with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. I could see my father's face in my mind, the way he looked at me in the car. Like I was still 22. Like I hadn't earned every single piece of metal on my uniform. Something was building inside me. Not anger. Not resentment. Just a quiet, growing awareness that the collision between who I was and who he thought I was couldn't be avoided much longer. I kept walking toward the secure briefing room, my credentials ready, my clearance active, my name on a list that mattered. And somewhere behind me, in a building he no longer had access to, my father probably believed he was the one who'd gotten me here. My phone buzzed at 14:58 hours. A secure text, routed through the defense network, encrypted and brief, SCF 4B. Doors close in 60 seconds. I picked up my pace, moving from a professional stride to something just short of a jog. The corridors were busy, staff officers shuttling between meetings, civilians clutching folders, a pair of Air Force captains debating something in low voices as they passed. I heard footsteps behind me, faster than mine. My father's voice cut through the ambient noise. "Sarah, wait up." I didn't slow down. The SCF door was 30 feet ahead, the Marine standing outside it already glancing at his watch. My father caught up, slightly winded. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" "Briefing," I said, not breaking stride. "Which one?" I didn't answer. The details were classified. He didn't have need to know. We reached the outer door. I pulled my common access card from my uniform pocket and held it to the scanner. The light flashed green. The magnetic lock disengaged with a heavy click. My father grabbed my arm, his grip firm enough to stop my forward motion. "Sarah, stop." I turned to face him. His expression was serious, almost alarmed. "You can't go in there." "Dad, I have to. That room is for top brass only." His voice was loud enough that a passing Navy lieutenant glanced over, then quickly looked away. I kept my tone level. "Dad, I'm due inside." He stepped between me and the door, his body language protective, but his words patronizing. "Don't be ridiculous. They'll laugh you right out of that room." Let me deal with this. The Marine guard was watching now, his face carefully neutral. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, something colder, sharper. The realization that this wasn't protection. This was dismissal. Public, unambiguous dismissal. Dad, step aside. I'm serious, Sarah. I know how this place works. You don't just walk into a flag-level briefing because you think you're supposed to be there. I am supposed to be there. He shook his head, the gesture both pitying and certain. Sweetheart, listen to me. I've been in this building longer than you've been in the Navy. I know what rooms are for whom. This isn't. I stepped past him. The guard, reading the situation with the practiced skill of someone who'd seen every flavor of Pentagon drama, opened the inner door for me. My father lunged forward, his voice rising. Hey. I said she can't. He followed me through the door. The heavy steel panel swung shut behind both of us, the automatic lock engaging with a final, echoing thunk. We were inside the SCF antechamber now, a small space with another door ahead, this one marked with red and white warnings about authorized access and federal penalties for violations. My father looked around, realization beginning to dawn. Sarah, we need to leave. Right now. The inner door opened. A room full of generals and flag officers stood as I entered. I saw them in a sweeping glance. Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, Navy. A wall of stars and eagles. Ribbons representing campaigns I'd studied at the War College. Faces I recognized from Joint Task Force briefs and strategic planning sessions. At the head of the table, a 4-star Army general, Marcus Boyd, if I remembered correctly, looked at me with the calm authority of someone who'd commanded divisions. Commander Holt. Welcome. Then his gaze shifted past me to my father, and his expression changed. Confusion, edged with something harder. And, who is this civilian? My father froze. The color drained from his face in stages, like a time-lapse of humiliation. He stood just inside the doorway of a space he had no clearance to enter, no authorization to occupy, no reason to be in. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. General Boyd's tone remained even, but the question had weight. Commander, can you explain why an unauthorized individual has entered a secure compartmented information facility? Every eye in the room was on me now. Not judging, waiting. This was my briefing. My responsibility. My problem to solve. I kept my voice steady. Sir, this is my father, James Holt. He's a retired DoD civilian. He followed me and without realizing the space was restricted. It wasn't entirely true. He'd followed me in because he didn't believe I belonged here. But I wasn't going to say that in front of a room full of general officers. Boyd's expression didn't soften, but he nodded slightly. He pressed a button on the console in front of him. Security, we have an unauthorized civilian in SCF-4B. Please escort him out and document the incident. 2 guards appeared within seconds, their movements professional and impersonal. They didn't touch my father, but their presence made it clear he had no choice. My father looked at me, his face a mix of shock, confusion, and something I'd never seen before, fear. Not of the guards. Of the situation. Of the reality he couldn't deny anymore. Sarah, Dad, you need to go. He left without another word, flanked by the guards, his shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen. The door closed behind him. General Boyd gestured to an empty seat at the table. Commander, please. I sat. The other officers settled back into their chairs. A Navy Vice Admiral 2 seats down gave me the smallest nod, acknowledgement, maybe support. Boyd opened a folder in front of him. Let's begin. Commander Holt, you're here to brief us on signal intelligence patterns in the South China Sea. The floor is yours. I opened my laptop, pulled up my presentation, and began. I spoke for 20 minutes, walking through data trends, threat assessments, and operational recommendations. I fielded questions from a Marine 3-star about asset positioning and a 2-star Air Force general about electronic warfare vulnerabilities. My answers were clear, backed by evidence, delivered without hesitation. When I finished, Boyd closed his folder. Thank you, Commander. Solid analysis. We'll incorporate this into the next phase of planning. The meeting continued without me. I gathered my materials and left the SCIF, my credentials scanned, my exit logged. Outside, in the bright corridor, I stood for a moment, letting my heart rate settle. My father was gone. The guards had taken him somewhere, probably to a holding area where they'd verify his identity, document the breach, and release him with a warning. I checked my phone. 20 hours. I had another meeting in 40 minutes. I walked toward the nearest break room, found an empty chair, and sat down. My hands were steady. My breathing was controlled. But something inside me felt cracked open, exposed in a way I wasn't ready to process. He grabbed my arm. He told me I didn't belong. He'd followed me into a restricted space because he couldn't accept that I knew something he didn't. And a room full of generals had stood up when I walked in. I closed my eyes, replaying the moment. The look on his face. The silence that followed Boyd's question. The way he'd left without defending himself because there was no defense. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt. I was just tired. Tired of shrinking. Tired of managing his perception of me. Tired of letting him believe I was still someone who needed his guidance to navigate the world. I opened my eyes and checked my schedule. Another briefing. Another room. Another chance to do the job I'd spent 17 years learning to do. I stood up, smoothed my uniform, and kept moving. I grew up in a house where structure meant love. My father never said, "I'm proud of you," out loud, but he showed up to my high school track meets with a stopwatch, timing my splits and explaining where I could improve. He edited my college essays with the precision of a man who'd spent decades writing policy memos. When I told him I wanted to join the Navy, he drove me to the recruiter's office himself, sat through the briefing, and asked more questions than I did. He loved me. I never doubted that. But his love came with guardrails, corrections, and an unspoken belief that I needed guidance more than I needed trust. James Holt worked for the Department of Defense for 32 years, starting as a GS-9 analyst and retiring as a GS-15 program manager. He coordinated logistics for weapons systems, wrote budget justifications that went to Congress, and briefed generals on acquisition timelines. He was good at his job. He was proud of his work. And when he retired, he carried that identity with him like a uniform he refused to take off. He loved the idea of me joining the Navy. He imagined me as an officer, competent, disciplined, respected. But somewhere in his mind, I think he assumed I'd stay junior. That I'd rise to a certain point and plateau, the way most careers do. Oh, 1. Ensign. He helped me pick out my first uniforms. Oh, 2. Lieutenant junior grade. He asked if I was still on the ship. Oh, 3. Lieutenant. He started confusing my rank with job titles. So you're a department head now? Oh, 4. Lieutenant commander. He stopped asking about specifics. You're doing well, I'm sure. Oh, 5. Commander. He didn't attend my promotion ceremony. He said the drive from Arlington was too long. He never asked what I did. Not really. I tried to tell him once about an intelligence assessment I'd led, a threat I'd identified that shifted an entire carrier group's deployment timeline. He listened politely, nodded, and changed the subject to Pentagon parking policies. It wasn't malice. It wasn't even dismissiveness, not exactly. It was something else, an inability to update his internal model of who I was. In his mind, I was frozen at 22, newly commissioned, eager and unproven. He didn't see the years I'd spent in windowless rooms, analyzing signals that could mean the difference between stability and conflict. He didn't see the junior officers I'd mentored, the evaluations I'd written, the decisions I'd made under pressure that would have broken younger versions of me. He saw his daughter. And his daughter needed guidance. I enabled it. I'll admit that. Every time he corrected me in public, I stayed quiet. Every time he explained something I already knew, I nodded. Every time he introduced me as someone who works in the Navy, I let it slide. I told myself it didn't matter. That his perception didn't change the reality of my service. That I could be a commander at work and a daughter at home, and the two didn't need to intersect. But they did intersect. They always had. I helped him through his retirement, filing paperwork, explaining benefits, setting up his VA healthcare. He never thanked me, not directly, but he'd call me when he was confused about something, his voice tight with frustration. I'd walk him through it, step by step, the way I'd walk a junior analyst through a classified system. And then he'd turn around and explain how the Pentagon worked, as if I hadn't been working there, in one capacity or another, for over a decade. I remember one conversation about 2 years ago. I'd just returned from a deployment. We were having dinner at his place, something simple he'd thrown together. He asked how the deployment went. Busy, I said. We were tracking some significant developments he interrupted, when I was at the Pentagon, we had access to all that intel. I probably saw the same reports you're talking about. He hadn't. His clearance had been lower than mine. His access had been limited to acquisition and logistics. But I didn't correct him. I just nodded and finished my meal. That was the pattern. I carried the weight of our relationship, adjusting my behavior to keep things smooth, avoiding confrontations that might force him to see me clearly. I told myself it was respect, that I was honoring him by not challenging his authority. But respect isn't the same as erasure. And authority that demands you stay small isn't authority, it's control. I saw the same dynamic in my own command. Junior officers who outgrew their mentors but couldn't admit it. Senior leaders who felt threatened by competence they hadn't personally cultivated. The fragile egos of men who'd built their identities on being the smartest person in the room, only to discover the room had moved on without them. My father wasn't cruel. He wasn't abusive. He didn't rage or manipulate or gaslight. He just couldn't see me. And I'd spent years making that easier for him. When I walked into that SCF, when he grabbed my arm and told me I didn't belong, I realized something. The betrayal wasn't new. It had been happening in small moments for years. I'd just been too busy protecting his feelings to notice. He didn't see me as a commander. He saw me as someone who needed to be saved from embarrassment. And when a room full of generals stood up for me, the truth became undeniable. Not just to him. To me. I'd been complicit in my own invisibility. I'd let him diminish me because confronting him felt harder than enduring it. But endurance has limits. And I'd just hit mine. The briefing lasted another 90 minutes. I sat in the back, taking notes, absorbing the discussion without contributing further. When it ended, the attendees filed out in clusters, conversations continuing into the hallway. Vice Admiral Leon Rourke caught my eye as he passed. "Good work in there, Commander." "Thank you, sir." He paused, glancing toward the door my father had been escorted through. "Everything squared away?" "Yes, sir." He nodded and moved on. No judgment. No pity. Just acknowledgement that something had happened and I'd handled it. I gathered my materials and left the SCF. The corridors felt different now, quieter, even though they were just as crowded. I moved through them on autopilot, my mind replaying the moment over and over. The grab. The scolding. The certainty in his voice when he said I didn't belong. I found an empty office, a small, windowless room used for overflow meetings, and sat down at the desk. My laptop was still open, the briefing slides glowing faintly in the dim light. I closed it. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the blank wall in front of me. I thought about the last time my father had really listened to me. Not nodded politely, not interrupted with his own story, but actually listened. I couldn't remember. I thought about the moment in the SCF when General Boyd asked who he was. The way my father's face had changed. The humiliation, yes, but also the confusion, like he genuinely couldn't understand how he'd ended up there. He'd followed me into that room because he believed, with absolute certainty, that I was about to embarrass myself. That I'd misunderstood my clearance, overestimated my importance, wandered into a space I had no business occupying. He'd followed me to protect me. But protection without trust is just control. And control dressed up as love is still control. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. No messages from him. No calls. He was probably still being processed by security, filling out forms, answering questions about why he'd breached a SCF. I could call him. Smooth things over. Apologize for the confusion, even though I hadn't caused it. I put the phone down. I thought about the officers I'd served under, the good ones, the ones who'd shaped me. They'd pushed me hard, challenged my assumptions, demanded excellence. But they'd also trusted me. They'd seen my potential before I did and created space for me to grow into it. My father had done the opposite. He created a ceiling and insisted I stay beneath it. Not out of malice. Out of fear. Fear that if I surpassed him, I wouldn't need him anymore. Fear that his expertise, his knowledge, his years of service would become irrelevant. Fear that I'd become someone he didn't recognize. And in trying to prevent that, he'd made it inevitable. I checked my watch. 16:30 hours. I had one more meeting today, then I was done. I stood up, smoothed my uniform, and walked back into the corridor. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. "Where are you?" I didn't respond immediately. I let the message sit there unanswered while I walked to my next meeting. When I finally replied, it was brief, still working. "I'll find my own way back." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "We need to talk." I put my phone away. Yes, we did need to talk. But not today. Not while I was still processing what had happened. Not while the image of him standing in that SCAF, frozen and exposed, was still fresh in my mind. I attended my final meeting of the day, a smaller session, fewer stars, more technical focus. I contributed when appropriate, stayed quiet when I had nothing to add, and left when it was done. Outside, the sun was setting over the Potomac. The Pentagon's parking lots were emptying, the day shift giving way to the night crew, analysts and watchstanders, and people whose work didn't respect business hours. I walked to the metro station, bought a farewell card, and rode the train back to my hotel in silence. In my room, I changed out of my uniform and into civilian clothes. I ordered room service, something simple, forgettable. I ate without tasting it. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel it. Not anger. Not even sadness, exactly. Just recognition. The relationship I'd had with my father, the one where I stayed small so he could feel steady, was over. I didn't know what would replace it. But I knew I couldn't go back. He was waiting in the hotel lobby when I came down the next morning. I saw him before he saw me, sitting in one of the oversized chairs near the entrance, his jacket zipped up despite the warmth, his hands clasped in his lap. He looked older than he had yesterday. Smaller. I considered turning around, taking the side exit, avoiding the conversation entirely. But that would just delay the inevitable. I walked over. He stood when he saw me, his movements stiff. "Sarah." "Dad." We stood there for a moment, neither of us sure how to start. He broke first. "You made me look like an idiot." Not an apology. An accusation. I kept my voice level. "You entered a secure compartmented information facility without clearance." "I didn't make you do that. You know what I mean." "No, Dad. I don't." He shifted his weight, frustration tightening his jaw. "I was trying to help you. I didn't want you to walk into a room full of generals and get humiliated. I was invited to that room. My name was on the access list. I was there to brief them." He shook his head, the gesture dismissive. "You don't understand how these things work." "I understand exactly how they work. Sarah, I'm a commander in the United States Navy. I've held a TS/SCI clearance for over a decade. I've briefed flag officers in 3 different theaters. The reason you didn't know I belonged in that room is because you've never asked what I actually do." His face flushed. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" He looked away, toward the lobby windows, the morning light harsh and unforgiving. "I've always supported your career. You've supported the idea of my career. You've never engaged with the reality of it. I drove you to the Pentagon. I tried to help, you tried to control." The word landed hard. He flinched, then recovered, his expression hardening. "I'm your father. I have a right to what? To tell me where I don't belong? To grab my arm in public? To follow me into a restricted space because you couldn't believe I knew better than you?" He didn't answer. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Dad, I need space." "Space?" "Yes." "What does that mean?" "It means I need you to step back. I need time to figure out what this relationship looks like when I'm not managing your perception of me." He stared at me, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite name. Hurt, anger, confusion, pride refusing to give ground. "This is ridiculous," he said finally. "You're overreacting." "I'm not. I made a mistake." "I didn't realize, it's not about the mistake, Dad. It's about the pattern. It's about years of you talking over me, dismissing me, treating me like I'm still 22. I don't do that. You did it yesterday. You've done it 1,000 times before. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a moment, I thought he might actually hear me, that something might shift. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and said, I think you're being unfair. But if you need space, fine. I'll give you space. It wasn't an acknowledgement. It was a retreat. I nodded. Okay, I'll head out. He picked up his jacket from the chair. When you're ready to talk like adults, you know where to find me. He left without looking back. I stood in the lobby, watching him go, feeling the weight of something ending without resolution. A part of me wanted to call after him, to soften the blow, to make it easier for him. But I didn't. I'd spent too many years making things easier for him. I went back to my room, packed my things, and checked out. The rest of the week passed in a blur of meetings, briefings, and reports. I focused on the work, let it fill the spaces where thoughts of my father tried to intrude. On my last day at the Pentagon, I walked through the corridors one final time, taking in the controlled chaos, the hum of a building that never really slept. I thought about my father moving through these same halls year after year, building his identity around his proximity to power. And I realized he'd never had power. He'd had access. And when the access ended, he'd tried to hold on to it through me. But I wasn't an extension of his legacy. I was my own. I left the Pentagon that Friday afternoon, my assignment complete, my evaluation strong. I didn't call my father to say goodbye. I just left. Word spread quietly. Not about the incident. Security incidents in SIFs stayed locked down, documented but not gossiped about. But the briefing itself had made an impression. My analysis had been sharp, my recommendations sound. 3 weeks later, I received a message from Vice Admiral Rourke's office. The Admiral requests a follow-up discussion on your South China Sea assessment. Are you available for a secure call? I was. The call lasted 40 minutes. Rourke asked detailed questions, probed my methodology, challenged a few assumptions. I defended my analysis without hedging, presented alternatives where appropriate, and acknowledged gaps in the data. At the end, he said, "We're incorporating this into the next phase of operational planning." Solid work, Commander. Thank you, sir. One more thing. His tone shifted slightly. Your name came up in a selection board discussion this week. I said nothing, waiting. Captain. Oh, 6. You're on the list. The promotion wouldn't be official for months. There were procedures, reviews, administrative timelines. But the selection was made. I thanked him, kept my voice professional, and ended the call. Then I sat in my office, staring at the wall, processing. Captain. Oh, 6. I'd worked 17 years for this. Every evaluation, every deployment, every late night in a classified space analyzing data that most people would never know existed. And my father had no idea. He'd stopped calling after our conversation in the hotel lobby. I'd stopped reaching out. The silence between us stretched from days to weeks. I didn't tell him about the promotion. I didn't tell him about the follow-up with Rourke. I didn't tell him that the room he'd insisted I didn't belong in had opened doors I hadn't even known were available. I just kept working. My days were full, briefings, reports, coordination with Allied intelligence services. I was better at my job now, sharper, more confident. Something had shifted after the Pentagon. I'd stopped second-guessing myself, stopped managing how others perceived me. I'd stopped shrinking. One evening, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. Not a message, a link. An article about Navy leadership changes, some reshuffling at the Pentagon. No comment. Just the link. I didn't respond. 2 days later, another message, a quote about military service, something vague and inspirational, the kind of thing people share when they don't know what else to say. I didn't respond to that either. He was testing the waters, trying to reconnect without acknowledging what had happened. I recognized the pattern. I'd seen it in officers who'd been relieved of command, small overtures, attempts to reestablish normalcy without addressing the failure that caused the rupture. It didn't work in the Navy. It wouldn't work here. A month passed. Then another. I attended a change of command ceremony for a colleague, watched the ritual unfold with its precision and tradition. Afterward, at the reception, a captain I'd worked with years ago approached me. "Heard your name came up for '06, she said quietly. "Congratulations. It's not official yet. It will be." She smiled. "You've earned it." I thanked her, and we talked for a while about the operational tempo, the challenges of the current threat environment, the usual shop talk that fills the margins of military gatherings. When I left, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: steady. Not happy, not sad. Just steady. I drove back to my apartment, changed into running clothes, and went for a long run through the neighborhood. The air was cool, the streets quiet. I thought about my father. About the years I'd spent trying to be someone he could understand. I thought about the moment in the SCF, the look on his face, the reality he couldn't deny. I thought about the silence that had followed, the space I'd asked for and he'd refused to fill with anything real. And I realized I didn't need his approval anymore. I'd needed it once. Desperately. It had shaped my choices, my behavior, my willingness to stay small. But I'd outgrown it. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted to punish him. Just because I'd finally seen myself the way that room full of generals had seen me, as someone who belonged. I finished my run, showered, and made dinner. I ate slowly, deliberately, tasting each bite. Then I sat down and wrote my father an email. Not long. Not emotional. Just clear. "Dad, I know you've been trying to reach out. I appreciate it. But I need you to understand something. I can't have a relationship with you where I'm still the person you think I am instead of the person I've become. If you want to know who I am now, you'll have to ask. And you'll have to listen. Until then, I need to keep my distance. I hope you can understand." I read it twice, then sent it. He didn't respond. And that, somehow, felt like an answer. The promotion ceremony was small. Not because I wanted it that way, because that's how these things worked when you weren't at a high-profile command. A conference room, a flag officer, a few colleagues, a photographer documenting the moment for official records. Vice Admiral Rourke conducted the ceremony himself. He read the orders, spoke briefly about my service, and pinned the captain's eagles onto my shoulder boards. "Congratulations, Captain Holt." "Thank you, sir." We shook hands. The small group applauded. Someone handed me a framed copy of my promotion orders. Afterward, there was cake in the break room, casual conversation, the kind of low-key celebration that happens when everyone present understands the significance without needing to make a spectacle of it. Captain Dana Ruiz, a colleague I'd worked with on a previous assignment, pulled me aside. "How does it feel?" "Surreal," I admitted. "You've earned it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I smiled. "I won't." She hesitated, then said, "Your father didn't come?" I shook my head. "I didn't invite him." She nodded, understanding without needing details. "That's hard." "It is." "But necessary?" "Yes." She squeezed my shoulder and moved on. Later, alone in my office, I looked at the framed orders on my desk. Captain, United States Navy. '06. I thought about calling my father. Telling him. Offering one more chance for him to be part of this. But I didn't. Because this moment, this achievement, wasn't about him. It was about 17 years of service. It was about the junior officers I'd mentored, the operations I'd supported, the long hours in windowless rooms making decisions that mattered. It was about the room full of generals who'd stood when I walked in. It was about me. I packed up my things, turned off the lights, and headed home. That night, I received a message from my father. Just 3 words, I heard. Congratulations. No acknowledgement of the email I'd sent. No reflection on what had happened. Just a polite, distant recognition of something he'd learned through other channels. I replied, "Thank you." Nothing more. 2 days later, he sent another message, "Can we talk?" I didn't respond immediately. I let the question sit unanswered while I thought about what I wanted. Did I want a relationship with him? Yes. Did I want the relationship we'd had? No. Could he change enough to make a new relationship possible? I didn't know. After a week, I replied, "I'm not ready yet. I'll reach out when I am." He didn't push. Maybe he understood. Maybe he just didn't know what else to say. Months passed. I settled into my new rank, took on new responsibilities. The work was demanding, the stakes higher, the decisions more consequential. I was good at it. I carried myself differently now, not arrogant, just certain. I'd stopped questioning whether I belonged in the rooms I was invited to. I'd stopped managing other people's perceptions of me. I was a captain in the United States Navy. I'd earned it. And no one, not my father, not anyone, could take that away from me. One evening, I was reviewing intelligence reports in my office when my phone buzzed. A message from my father. "I've been thinking about what you said. You're right. I didn't listen. I'm sorry." I stared at the screen. It wasn't a full apology. It didn't address everything. But it was more than he'd given before. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another. "Finally, I appreciate that. It means a lot." A pause. "Then, can we start over?" Slowly? I thought about it. About the years of frustration, the accumulated weight of being unseen. About the moment in the SCIF, the grab, the dismissal. But also about the man who'd driven me to track meets, who'd helped me prepare for the academy, who'd loved me in the only way he knew how. Maybe I typed. But it has to be different. I need you to see me. Really see me. I want to try. I didn't respond immediately. I let the words settle, weighing them against everything that had come before. Finally, "Okay. Let's talk next week." We did talk. It was awkward, halting, full of pauses and careful phrasing. He asked about my new responsibilities. I answered, watching to see if he was really listening. He was. Or he was trying. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a clean resolution. But it was a start. Over the following months, we spoke more often. He asked better questions. I shared more freely. He still slipped into old patterns sometimes, talking over me, explaining things I already knew, but he caught himself now. Apologized. It was progress. Slow, inconsistent, but real. I didn't forgive him in one dramatic moment. Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't an event. It was a process. And I was still in it. 6 months after my promotion, I returned to the Pentagon for another joint tasking rotation. I walked through the same corridors, past the same SCF where it had all happened. The building felt different now. Or maybe I felt different in it. I attended a briefing in SCF 4B, the same room. Different attendees, different topic, but the same space. When I walked in, the generals stood. I took my seat, delivered my brief, fielded questions with the confidence that came from knowing I belonged there. Afterward, Vice Admiral Rourke approached me. "Excellent work, Captain. We'd like you to lead the next phase of this assessment." "I'd be honored, sir." He nodded, then said casually, "I heard your father used to work here." "He did. Must be proud." I paused, considering. "I think he's getting there." Rourke smiled slightly. "That's all we can ask." He moved on, and I gathered my materials. As I left the building, I passed the visitor entrance where my father had tried to use his expired badge. Where he'd driven me, convinced I needed his guidance. I thought about calling him, telling him I'd been back, that I'd briefed in the same room he'd been escorted out of. But I didn't. Not to punish him. Not to make a point. Just because it didn't matter anymore. His validation, or lack of it, didn't define me. I walked to my car, drove back to my hotel, and prepared for the next day's meetings. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my hotel room, looking out over the city. The Pentagon was visible in the distance, its lights steady against the darkening sky. I thought about the young ensign I'd been, nervous and eager, desperate to prove herself. I thought about the commander who'd walked into that SCF, still carrying the weight of her father's expectations. And I thought about the captain I was now, steady, certain, defined by her own choices. The legacy wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was truth. The truth that I'd earned my place. That I'd worked for it, sacrificed for it, grown into it. The truth that his inability to see me didn't change what I'd become. The truth that real authority comes from confidence, integrity, and the willingness to lead without needing to diminish others. He told me that room was for top brass only. I'd walked in anyway. And they'd been waiting for me. Not because of him. Not in spite of him. Just because I belonged there. I stood up, walked back inside, and closed the door. Tomorrow, I'd brief another room full of flag officers. I'd make decisions that mattered. I'd lead with the clarity that came from knowing exactly who I was. And my father, wherever he was, whatever he thought, would have to find his own way to peace with that. I was done carrying his doubt. I had work to do. 20 years changes everything and nothing. I'm 58 now, a vice admiral with 2 stars that feel heavier some days than others. The Navy gave me a 3rd decade of service, assignments that took me from the Pacific Fleet to Strategic Command, from carrier strike groups to the Pentagon's inner ring. I've briefed presidents, managed crises that never made the news, and mentored officers who now outrank the person I was when this all started. My father is 87. He lives in a senior community outside Arlington, the kind of place with landscaped walkways and activities coordinator who sends weekly newsletters. He moved there 6 years ago, after a minor stroke made it clear he couldn't manage the house alone. I helped him downsize, sorted through decades of accumulated documents, old DoD memos, performance reviews from the 1990s, photographs of a Pentagon that doesn't exist anymore. We found my academy graduation photo in a box labeled miscellaneous. Not framed. Not displayed. Just filed away with his tax returns from 2001. I didn't say anything. Just put it in the pile of things to keep. Our relationship rebuilt itself slowly, unevenly, like scar tissue forming over a wound that never quite healed properly. We talk on the phone every Sunday morning. I visit once a month when my schedule allows. We've developed a careful rhythm, topics that are safe, subjects we avoid, a mutual understanding that some things are better left in the past. But the past has a way of resurfacing. Last Tuesday, I received a call from the community's director. My father had collapsed during breakfast. Not another stroke, just age, fragility, the body's gradual surrender to time. They'd taken him to the hospital as a precaution. Everything was stable. But I should come. I was in San Diego, midway through a conference on naval intelligence integration. I made my apologies, delegated my remaining sessions, and caught the next flight to D.C. By the time I arrived at the hospital, he was awake, irritated, insisting he was fine and that everyone was overreacting. The doctor, a patient woman in her 40s who clearly dealt with stubborn elderly men on a regular basis, explained that he was dehydrated, his blood pressure had dropped, and they wanted to keep him overnight for observation. "This is ridiculous," my father muttered. I just stood up too fast. "Dad, let them do their job." He looked at me, seemed about to argue, then settled back against the pillows. "You didn't need to come all the way out here." "I know. I'm fine. I know." We sat in silence for a while. The hospital room was generic, pale blue walls, a television mounted in the corner, the steady beep of monitors tracking his vitals. Through the window, I could see the parking lot, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. "How's the conference?" he asked finally. "Good. Important discussions about integration frameworks." He nodded vaguely. 20 years ago, he would have interrupted, explained something about Pentagon procedures, tried to connect my work to his own experience. Now he just listened. "You'll go back?" he asked. "Tomorrow, probably. Depends on what the doctor says." "You should go back today." "I told you I'm fine." I didn't argue. I just stayed. A nurse came in to check his vitals, asked him questions about his pain level and whether he needed anything. He was polite but curt, the way he'd always been with service workers, not rude, just transactional. After she left, he closed his eyes. I thought he'd fallen asleep, but then he said, quietly, "I've been thinking about that day at the Pentagon." I went still. We'd never talked about it directly. Not in 20 years. We'd danced around it, referenced it obliquely, but never actually discussed what happened in that SCF. "Dad, you don't need to." I was embarrassed, he continued, eyes still closed. Not just in the moment. For years after. I couldn't understand how I'd gotten it so wrong. I didn't know what to say. He opened his eyes, turned his head to look at me. "I really didn't know what you did." "I thought I did, but I didn't. And when I saw those generals stand up for you, when I heard that 4-star call you Commander Holt like you were important." He trailed off. "I was important," I said gently. "I am important." Not because of rank. Because of the work. I know that now. Do you? He was quiet for a moment. I spent 32 years at the Pentagon thinking I was close to power. I coordinated with generals, I briefed flag officers, I had access to classified programs. I thought that made me important. You were important, Dad. Your work mattered. But I wasn't in the room. Not really. I was adjacent to it. And when you walked into that room and they stood up, his voice cracked slightly. I realized you were everything I'd wanted to be and never was. The monitors beeped steadily. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang. That must have been hard, I said. It was. But not in the way you think. He shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. I wasn't jealous. Or I was, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing I'd spent years trying to keep you small because I was afraid of becoming irrelevant. I'd known this, of course. I'd understood it even 20 years ago, in the immediate aftermath. But hearing him say it, acknowledging it directly, felt different. You were never irrelevant to me, I said. I was irrelevant to myself. And I couldn't stand it. He looked at the ceiling, his jaw tight. When I retired, I lost my identity. I didn't know who I was without the building, without the badge, without the meetings. And then you kept rising, kept achieving, and I couldn't. I couldn't be happy for you because your success reminded me of my own obsolescence. This was the most honest he'd ever been with me. I'm sorry, he said. I know I've said it before, but I don't know if I ever really explained what I was sorry for. Not just for that day. For all of it. For not seeing you. For talking over you. For treating you like you were still a junior officer when you'd already become the kind of leader I'd only ever read about. I reached over and took his hand. It was smaller than I remembered, the skin thin and spotted with age. I forgive you, Dad. Do you? Yes. He squeezed my hand weakly. I don't know if I've forgiven myself. That's harder, I admitted. But you should try. We sat like that for a while, his hand in mine, the hospital sounds filling the silence between us. Eventually, he fell asleep. I stayed until visiting hours ended, then drove to a hotel near the hospital. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about the arc of our relationship, the years of friction, the breaking point, the slow reconstruction. I thought about the person I'd been at 38, still carrying the weight of his expectations, still trying to prove myself to someone who couldn't see me clearly. And I thought about who I'd become in the years since. The promotion to captain had been just the beginning. I'd commanded a destroyer squadron, served as Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, led task forces in 3 theaters. I'd made decisions that affected thousands of sailors, shaped policies that would outlast my service, mentored junior officers who would carry forward the lessons I'd learned. I'd become, by any measure, the kind of leader the Navy builds its future around. But more than that, I'd become someone who didn't need external validation to know her own worth. The next morning, I returned to the hospital. My father was awake, eating a breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast with the resigned expression of someone who knows hospital food is terrible, but arguing about it won't help. They're releasing me this afternoon, he said. Clean bill of health, relatively speaking. That's good. You should get back to your conference. I will. But I want to show you something first. I pulled out my phone, opened my photos, and scrolled to a picture from 3 months ago. A ceremony at the Pentagon. A promotion. 2 stars becoming 3. I hadn't told him. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I'd learned that my achievements didn't require his acknowledgement to be real. But looking at him now, diminished by age and illness, but finally, genuinely seeing me, I wanted to share it. I handed him the phone. He looked at the image, me in my dress whites, a 3-star admiral pinning on my insignia, a room full of senior leaders in attendance. He zoomed in slightly, studying the details. Vice Admiral, he said quietly. Yes. 3 stars. Yes. He looked up at me, his eyes watery. I should have been there. You weren't ready then. Maybe you're now. He handed back the phone, his hand trembling slightly. I'm proud of you, Sarah. I don't know if I've ever said that clearly. Not just proud of what you've achieved, but who you are. The kind of person you've become. Thank you, Dad. You did it without me. You did it in spite of me, really. I did it because of the foundation you gave me, even if you couldn't see where I'd build on it. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. When's your next ceremony? When you make 4 stars. I laughed. That's not guaranteed. And it might not happen at all. It will, he said with sudden certainty. And when it does, I want to be there. If you'll have me. I thought about it. About whether I wanted him at the most significant moment of my career, if it came. About whether his presence would enhance it or complicate it. We'll see, I said. One step at a time. He accepted that. We talked for a while longer, safe topics, easier subjects. He asked about my command, actually listening when I explained the complexities of modern naval intelligence. He told me about the senior community, the friends he'd made, a book club he'd reluctantly joined. It was comfortable. Natural. The relationship we'd built over 20 years of careful reconstruction. Before I left, he said, I've been writing things down. Memories. Stories from my time at the Pentagon. Some about you, growing up, the academy. Nothing fancy, just things I want you to have. In case I forget them. I'd like that. Some of it's hard to write. The parts where I wasn't, where I didn't handle things well. Those parts matter too. He nodded. I know. I kissed his forehead, told him I'd call when I landed in San Diego, and left. On the flight back, I thought about legacy, not the professional kind, measured in promotions and citations, but the personal kind. The complicated inheritance of family, the patterns we repeat and the ones we break. My father had given me discipline, structure, a foundation of service. But he'd also given me limitations, constraints, a ceiling he'd tried to impose. I'd taken the foundation and discarded the ceiling. And in doing so, I'd built something he couldn't have imagined. But also something he could finally see. The conference concluded 2 days later. I delivered my closing remarks, comments about integration, cooperation, the future of naval intelligence in an increasingly complex threat environment. The audience was attentive, engaged. Several flag officers approached me afterward with follow-up questions and invitations to continue the discussion. I was good at this. I'd earned the right to be good at this. That night, alone in my hotel room, I called my father. How are you feeling? I asked. Better. Tired, but better. Good. Sarah, he said, thank you for coming. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. A pause. Then, I meant what I said. About being proud. About wanting to be there for the next one. I know. I've missed a lot. I can't get those years back. No. But you can be present for what's ahead. I want to be. Then be. We talked for a few more minutes, then said goodnight. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking out at the San Diego skyline, thinking about time, how it heals and how it hardens, how it gives us chances to change and takes away the ones we miss. My father was 87. He might have 5 years left, maybe 10 if he was lucky. We'd spent 20 years rebuilding something that had shattered in a Pentagon SCF. We'd never get back the time before that, the years when I was rising and he was refusing to see it. But we had now. And now, I'd learned, was all that ever mattered anyway. 3 weeks later, I was back in Washington for a planning session. I drove out to my father's senior community, found him in the common area playing chess with another resident. He saw me and smiled, a real smile, unguarded. Sarah, I didn't know you were in town. Last-minute trip. Thought I'd stop by. He excused himself from the chess game, and we walked outside to the courtyard. The spring afternoon was warm, the trees beginning to bloom. I finished the writing, he said. The memories I mentioned. That was fast. I've had a lot of time. He pulled a manila envelope from his jacket pocket. I made you a copy. The whole thing's about 40 pages. Some of it's boring Pentagon bureaucracy stories, but there's other stuff too. I took the envelope. Thank you. There's a section about that day. The SCAF. I tried to be honest about what I was thinking, what I was feeling. It's not flattering to me. I'll read it. We sat on a bench near the fountain. He looked older in the bright daylight, more fragile. But also more at peace. Do you ever regret it? He asked. The Navy? All those years of deployments, moving around, the sacrifices. No, I said. Never. Not even a little? Not even a little. He nodded. Good. You shouldn't. You built something remarkable. We sat in comfortable silence, watching residents move through the courtyard, couples walking slowly, a woman reading on a nearby bench. "I'm thinking about retirement," I said. "Not immediately, but in the next few years. 35 years of service is a good run." "What will you do?" "I don't know yet. Teach, maybe. Consult." "Right. You'd be good at any of it." "We'll see." He turned to look at me. "When you do retire, when you have that ceremony, I want to be there. If I'm still around." "You will be." "You don't know that." "No. But I'm choosing to believe it." He smiled. "Faith. That's new for you." "I learned it from watching sailors. Sometimes faith is all you have." We talked for another hour, then I had to leave for my meeting. He walked me to my car, moving slowly but steadily. "Dad," I said before getting in, "I'm glad you wrote those memories down. All of them, even the hard parts." "Me too." I drove back to the Pentagon, that envelope on the passenger seat beside me. That night, in my temporary quarters, I opened it and began to read. His handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but the words were clear. He wrote about his early years at the Pentagon, the pride he'd felt working in the building, the sense of purpose. He wrote about meeting my mother, my childhood, the day I told him I wanted to join the Navy. And then he wrote about the SCF. I followed her into that room because I couldn't accept that she'd surpassed me. Not professionally, I knew intellectually that she'd risen in rank. But I couldn't accept that she belonged in spaces I'd never accessed. I'd spent 32 years close to power, and she'd walked past me into the center of it. When those generals stood up for her, I felt my entire identity collapse. I wasn't her father in that moment. I was a civilian who'd breached security, a man who'd gotten everything wrong, someone who couldn't protect her because she didn't need protecting. She was the one with authority. She was the one who belonged. And I'd never felt smaller or more ashamed. I read the passage 3 times, then kept going. He wrote about the years after, the slow process of accepting who I'd become, the struggle to build a relationship that didn't depend on him being the authority. "I don't know if she's forgiven me. She says she has, but I wonder if it's complete. Maybe forgiveness isn't supposed to be complete. Maybe it's something you keep working at, like maintaining a ship or tending a garden. You do the work, day after day, and eventually something grows. Not the same as what was there before, but something new. Something that can survive." I closed the envelope and sat with it. He was right. Forgiveness wasn't complete. It was ongoing, imperfect, built on daily choices to show up and try. But it was real. And after 20 years, that was enough. The next morning, I called him. "I read what you wrote," I said. "And? It's honest. Thank you for that." "I tried." "I know. And Dad?" "Yes. You're wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "I have forgiven you. Completely. Not because you've earned it or because enough time has passed, but because holding on to it doesn't serve either of us anymore." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know." We talked for a few more minutes, then I had to go. But something had shifted. 20 years ago, in a Pentagon SCAF, my father had seen me clearly for the first time. Today, I'd seen him clearly too. Not the man who'd tried to keep me small. Not the father who couldn't acknowledge my achievements. But a man who'd made mistakes, lived with regret, and was trying, genuinely trying, to be better. That was all anyone could do. And it was enough. That's how it all unfolded. A moment I never expected, every general standing for me, and my father finally seeing who I actually am. If you've ever had someone in your life underestimate you, talk down to you, or refuse to see your growth, how did you handle it? Did you confront them, or did you walk away? Tell me your experience in the comments. I read everything. And if stories about boundaries, respect, and reclaiming your power resonate with you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs it. I'll see you in the next one.